More deep, more deep, more deep. So before Monami Denis Villeneuve launched his big screen adaptation of Dune, the last time the Dune franchise was seen prominently in the public sphere was on the Sci-Fi channel. And there were two miniseries, the first one being Frank Herbert's Dune, the second one being Children of Dune. And now going into this, I had been told by Dune fans this was a fairly good adaptation of the book. And so I went in expecting it to be somewhat decent. However, the first episode was really hard to get through. I almost stopped watching. Like, genuinely, it was an eyesore. I didn't love the acting. I thought the overall interpretation, visualization of the Dune universe on such a small budget, whilst admirable at the same time too, I was like, what is this? This hurts my eyes. This is so cheap. I don't like the direction of this. Getting through that first hour and a half episode, I was like, do I want to finish this? I don't know if I can. And whilst the second episode does have problems like the first episode, mainly due to its low budget and kind of the overall campy direction of it, overall it was a stronger episode and I was able to finish off the miniseries from there. But I won't lie, that first episode was really tough to get through. But before we get into the sci-fi miniseries of Dune, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, follow me on social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok. It's all down there. Plug EF Manar. Before we get into the video, I just want to quickly plug my latest short film, The Shining Optimism of EF Manar. Keep the spark alive. As dreamer and optimist E.F. Manar must find a way to keep his hopes and passions alive in a cynical world. Inspired by Wonka and The Greatest Showman, a lot of time, effort, love, and passion was put into this project, so I would really appreciate it if you guys could give it a watch. The film is linked down below in the description, and it's also on the homepage of my YouTube channel. I hope you guys watch it and really enjoy it. Anyways, back to the video. The whole show felt like a bizarre mix of its own sci-fi channel isms, the 1980 film, and the book. The cast is kind of hit and miss for me. I mean, Alec Newman I think is a fine actor and delivers a good performance. However, I look at him and I don't think he's Paul Atreides. Again, he does a fine job with his acting, but looking at him, that's not Paul Atreides. He's way too old to be playing Paul. Like, he was 26. He looked about 26. Also, there's something about short-haired Paul Atreides that just doesn't sit right with me. Like, even before Timothée Chalamet took on the role, we had Carl MacLachlan, and he had the long hair. Like, that Paul Atreides with short hair just doesn't seem right to me. Saskia Reeves is solid as the Lady Jessica, and shockingly, William Hurt is Duke Leto Atreides, and overall, I won't lie, I'm kind of mixed on his performance as Duke Leto, because again, his acting is fine for the most part, but there's that one bit that kind of throws me off, and it's when he screams, "They tried to take the life of my son!"
They tried to take the life of my son!
There's something about his line delivery of it. It's just weird. And speaking of that line, funnily enough, I don't think any of the three adaptations have nailed the feeling of that line, because in the book, when Frank Herbert describes it, he goes, when Duke Leto Atreides screamed, "They tried to take the life of my son," it, you know, really shook everyone. Everyone was, like, terrified. They'd never seen him so angry. And in all three screen adaptations of the story, I don't think anyone has really nailed that. I think the closest we get is to Oscar Isaac.
I am my honor demand.
They tried to take the life of my son! I don't give a damn about your honor.
In many ways, that line is meant to be akin to Tywin Lannister going, "They have my son!"
They have my son!
God bless you, Charles Dance, you're just incredible. But yeah, that tangent aside, Ian McNeice as the Baron Harkonnen is, again, something I'm mixed on. He's characterized more like the book Baron, but there's something about him that's very, like, overly flamboyant to the point where he is borderline on the 1980s version of the Baron, but he's not there. He's characterized to be more like the book Baron, where he's plotting and scheming and being kind of, you know, politically scheming and always talking to himself and revealing his plans. But then there are times in the show where he borderlines on becoming a cartoon character. If you got a hybrid of Stellan Skarsgård and Ian McNeice's Baron and you merge them together, that is the book Baron, perfectly brought to the screen. Because again, on screen, I do think Stellan Skarsgård is the most intimidating and more cinematic version of the Baron, but character-wise, he is missing the flamboyance, he is missing a bit of the goofiness. Like, the Baron is, like, goofy, but he's not silly. Ian McNeice's Baron borderlines of being cartoony and silly. And I'm not saying that Stellan's Baron isn't, like, kind of, like, silly sometimes. Like, in part 1 when he's, like, gorging on the food and he's like, "You have a wonderful kitchen, cousin." Or in part 2 when he's smoking the spice pipe, or he's, like, doing that during Faye's, like, birthday celebration, Gladiatorial Arena. Like, he has goofy and silly moments, but he's not, like, book Baron to where, like, he's like, "Oh, Faye, blah, 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 blah." Also, in Villeneuve's version, they don't specify that he's gay, which, like, every other version kind of does, or at least alludes to, so wonder why that was. Right, this version of the Reverend Mother I'm not a fan of at all. Design-wise, acting-wise, just no. That is not the Reverend Mother. What were they thinking? She doesn't look like a nun because the whole point of the Bene Gesserit is that they're inspired by the Jesuit priests, and she doesn't look like a nun. What is the hair choice? What? Now, moving away from the cast, my biggest problem with the show is the budget. Like, I know the show was produced on $20 million, but even still, the direction as well. There are ways to hide the low budget, but this kind of, like, goes ball to the walls in terms of its aesthetic. Like, it goes very, like, sci-fi and kind of poppy and pulpy in terms of its colors and costume design. But at the same time, too, a lot of it feels very un-Dune-like, and at the same time, too, just kind of cheap.
Return the fleet to its homes immediately.
The Guild does not take your orders.
And I know it's a very severe jump coming from the Denis Villeneuve films to this, but I mean, some of the design choices are just weird, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Also, there are certain side characters that feature prominently in the book and in other versions of the films, like Fade Ralph and Alia, but they're really, like, kind of like an afterthought in the show. Like, Fade Ralph, to me, doesn't really have much of a screen presence. And same with Alia. Like, whilst they do her perfectly fine and better than Villeneuve did, because, I mean, Villeneuve didn't bother to try. Again, I love you, Denis, but you chickened out on Alia. I don't know why. Like, why did you do that?
Just a chicken. Chip, 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 chip.
But, like, some of these side characters should have been given more respect and more moments. Like, Fade Ralph and Alia, two of my favorite characters in the book. They're in my top 3. But, like, why do they barely get anything to do in the show? Like, come on, give them something to do. Though I will say, a cool thing about the Fade Ralph plot is that they make Irulan a bit more involved, where, like, she goes to Fade's birthday celebration. And in many ways, she does the seduction subplot that is normally given to Margot Fenring in the book and in Dune Part 2. And they give it to Irulan in this, and it kind of works. I kind of dig it. One thing I will say about this miniseries that kind of surprised me was, boobs. We see boobs in this. Like, if I'm remembering the scene properly, Chani is just changing and then boom. There's boobs. Now, I've talked about this a little bit earlier on where I say that the visuals are a bit goofy. Both in terms of cinematography, costume designs, but also the direction too. There are certain moments, there are certain things in this show where I'm like, that's dumb. This looks really bad. Like, the Fremen war chant for Muad'Dib is just silly. They're all just like, Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib.
Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib.
Like, what were they thinking? Like, just do that, or just like, you know, the knife in the air. Like, what were they thinking? It just looked dumb.
Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib.
And I think I can blame the direction for the show, because I started watching Children of Dune. I saw the first episode, which adapted Dune Messiah, and overall, whilst it does have some of the budget problems of the show, you can tell that there is a different director at the helm of it. There's like some like attempt at cinematic direction to this miniseries. And speaking of Children of Dune, I will cover that at some point, because overall that show intrigued me because I found out James McAvoy plays Leto II, and like, that's really cool to me. And I've only seen the first episode, but gotta talk about the Dune Messiah adaptation because it's interesting. Now, circling back to Alec Newman, I think again his performance is good, and the big scene where Paul Atreides rallies the Fremen, you know, he does the whole, do you think I'm stupid enough to deprive myself of the best of us? Do you smash a knife before a battle speech? Whilst it is a lot more book accurate than the Villeneuve version, the Villeneuve version takes adaptational licenses to it, and I think for the better, because overall it makes Paul way more manipulative, and the overall scene and vibe of it is just so, like, chilling. Anyways, I digress. Going back to the sci-fi miniseries, the scene itself is more book accurate and it is good. However, there is a bit where I do feel like it falls a bit flat. Like, in many ways, the scene feels a bit rushed. Like, the bit where, you know, Paul puts on the ring and stuff. It's really quick and really rushed and really, I don't know, I wish it sat longer. Then again, I am coming off of Dune Part 2, and Timothée Chalamet's just phenomenal performance in that scene. Like, that scene is incredible. The way Denis Villeneuve brings that to life, and the overall feeling he's able to invoke, to where you can watch it in different ways. Like, if you know the story of Dune and Paul Atreides, and you see him, you know, sway this Fremen war council, you go, oh, this is terrifying. But at the same time too, you understand and feel their emotions. It's such a wonderfully layered scene. Udarasot udao fresihi me fribit kumuni. Yeah, I know the thing off by heart, more or less. Gaubakakali kakari hodai. But another thing not really in favor of the sci-fi miniseries scene is that it doesn't really help that it makes Paul look like he's kind of like pissing himself by the end of the scene. Like, he's just standing above and he's like delivering his speech, and then like water just starts like gushing from underneath him, and it just, the way the camera frames the scene, it just looks like he's pissing himself, and it's like, what is this? What happened here? And like I said, this show in many ways is like a weird blend of the book, the 1980s film, because I mean that first episode is trying really hard to be the David Lynch film, and it's also its own weird sci-fi miniseries adaptation, but just there are certain elements where they adapt it from the book where it doesn't land for me. Like, they do Baby Leto, but they kill Baby Leto before the final battle, and there's not really much emotional resonance to it. Like, the whole point is that Baby Leto dies during the battle, and then during the aftermath we see kind of like how cold and emotionally distant Paul is when he finds out that his son is dead, and he's just like, oh, whatever. Move on to the next, but let's go fight Fade Ralpha. But then again, there are certain moments in this miniseries that are more adaptationally faithful to the book than the Villeneuve version. Like how, when Paul and James fight in the show, it's more book accurate because they go to Siege Harbor and then James calls them up there, and then Paul and James fight, you know, they take off the still suits and they fight only in loincloths, like, that's all book accurate. And it's kind of funny because when you think about it, the Villeneuve version isn't really book faithful, because why would the Fremen be fighting in the still suits? Like, when one of them dies, they're going to be wasting water, so why would they do that? Like, to take off the still suit and fight in loincloths, that's book accurate and makes more sense in terms of the Fremen culture. But yes, to wrap things up, Frank Herbert's Dune, or Dune the sci-fi miniseries, is like a good adaptation of the book for the most part, if you can get past the really low budget. Like, the really small budget was an eyesore for me, and in many ways I almost couldn't finish the show. I had to really power through it. That first episode was really such a slog, and I was like, this is so low budget, I can't watch this. Like, this is like genuinely really bad. Like, film and TV are visual mediums, and so I really had to fight through the low budget this show had. The aesthetics were just not my cup of tea, and just, in many ways I've seen people go, oh yeah, you can enjoy this if you pretend it's like a stage play, and I'm like, even then though, some of the design choices are just weird and so un-Dune-like. But if you can stomach through that, it is a fairly decent adaptation of Dune. But to wrap things up, the sci-fi miniseries of Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, whatever you want to call it, I kind of just tend to call it the sci-fi miniseries now, is not amazing. It's a good adaptation of the book, but you do have to really fight through the cheap aesthetics and budget. Like, it is budget, and to a contemporary audience in the 2020s, it might be a massive turnoff. It almost was for me, but the strength of the maker pushed me through it. But those are my thoughts on Frank Herbert's Dune, the sci-fi miniseries, whatever you want to call it. I will be back in the future to do Children of Dune, because again, I've started it, I've seen the first episode. We'll talk about the Dune Messiah adaptation in it. Let me know what you think about the sci-fi miniseries in the comments down below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Could you get through it? Let me know again in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on social media, all the good stuff. Until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.